Yeah, okay. All right, I'm ready. All right. Reverend Al Sharpton live. I'm today in Nevada. I have the honor of bringing on the 44th President of the United States, and I think easily in the top three presidents in American history. Barack Obama is on the line. Mr. President, thank you for stopping and doing this. And let me start by asking you, who has sat in this seat where you had to deal with serious global issues as well as national issues, what would you say to our listeners around the country is at stake in this election from someone that knows what's going on globally and in terms of our national policies?
Well, before I talk about global and national issues, I got to wish you happy birthday, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You look 60, but I guess you got a whole decade past that. So, you are holding up good, and appreciate all the work that you're doing, reporting on the issues that are critical in this election and beyond. So best wishes from me and Michelle.
I appreciate it.
Look, I think there are two issues at stake here. One is the issue that should concern all Americans, and that is that on the one hand, you have Kamala Harris, somebody who has excelled at every position she's held, from district attorney to attorney general of California to U.S. senator to vice president, somebody who made her own way and, worked her way up, starting in a middle-class family, single mom, went to an HBCU, had doubters, at every stage of her career. Somebody who has been a champion on behalf of folks who needed help, whether it was victims of sexual assault, people who had been scammed and exploited by the home mortgage industry, or for-profit colleges, winning on their behalf so that they got a fair shake, and who has very concrete plans to move the country forward, whether it's on housing or education or making sure that women have control over their own bodies. And on the other hand, you have somebody who showed himself to be incompetent while in office, who carried grudges, sent out a lot of tweets, but when it came to minding the store, looking after the American people on vital issues like the pandemic, dropped the ball and did not seem to be concerned about the details. And there's a baseline level of focus, competence, hard work, diligence, understanding of policy that Donald Trump has not shown to be interested in. And so, regardless of who you are, you should want a president in there who knows how to do the work and doesn't treat the presidency just as a seat to show off or spout off or feed your ego. More specifically, when it comes, more specifically though, Reverend, I just want to add, when it comes to the African-American community, Latino community, people who historically have been on the outside, you have in Donald Trump somebody who consistently has shown disregard to people who are not like him. I don't have to tell you, this is somebody who has made a career out of demeaning and talking about and treating people of color in ways that indicate he does not think they necessarily are full members of the American community, whether it's him taking out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five without actually knowing the facts. And ultimately, you've got young men who were shown to be innocent, but had it been up to Donald Trump, that wouldn't have mattered. The history of his father and his family not renting explicitly to black people in the housing that they built. And it continues to today, where you've got at Madison Square Garden rally for him that features people who are suggesting that people of Puerto Rican descent are garbage. And so when you not only have somebody who doesn't seem to have the competence for the job, but also seems to consistently show disregard for people who are not like him, who makes a distinction between the real Americans, quote unquote, who support him and he's comfortable with, and everybody else who he suggests somehow are not real Americans. That kind of attitude is inconsistent with democracy and inconsistent with how we move this country forward. So to my mind, at least, this is a very clear choice, and I'm hopeful that the majority of voters see it the same way.
I might just note that I've been on tour at NASDAQ Network with Central Park Five because I fought for them 32 years ago. So you are absolutely right. He never took a position on any race-based case in New York. Both he and I are New Yorkers other than that case. But on the competence part, I wanted to raise with you, he inherited the Obama economy. When people in every community are being asked, didn't you do better under Trump? And when we're talking about 2017, 2018, that was Obama. That was not Trump. I mean, as you look at this, explain to our listeners how it takes time for what your predecessor has done to either you add or subtract from it, but it's not your doing.
Well, there's a critical point, Rev, and I've spoken to this at rallies across the country. When I came into office in 2009, I was inheriting a financial crisis brought about by the Republican administration. And we had to dig ourselves out of a historic hole. You had the financial crisis, you had layoffs, you had massive unemployment, mortgages were underwater, folks seeing their homes foreclosed upon. And over the course of 8 years, we rebuilt the economy and made it stronger. And we had 75 straight months of job growth. And so by the time I leave office, by the time I'm handing it over to Trump, the economy is going strong. The trend lines are all positive. Unemployment has dropped. Inflation is low. And so his first 2 years in office, what people are attributing to him has to do with the work that I did and my team did and Nancy Pelosi and the Congress, all the programs and policies that we put into place. And he, the only thing he did in his first 2 years was give a tax cut to mostly rich people who didn't need it and drove up the deficit in the process. So there's no actions that he took in the first 2 years of his term that are attributable to his policies. The economy was good because we had made it good. We had worked hard to make it good. Now, when people ask, all right, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? 4 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
It was about to start. And what people seem to forget is that he mishandled that. And I've tried to describe for people, look, I try to be accurate. I try to be fair. No matter who was president, COVID, the pandemic, would have been a crushing blow to the U.S. economy. People would have died. Businesses would have been shut down. travel would have been restricted. But we had an entire playbook that I gave to Trump that said, if there's a pandemic, here's what you do. That playbook was apparently ignored, and as a consequence, a country like Canada had a 60% lower death rate than the United States. Over 1 million people died here in the United States because Donald Trump was going on TV talking about injecting bleach into as a cure for COVID. What that means is that if we had more competent government during COVID, up to 600,000 people might be alive. Disproportionately, those folks were black and brown. And so the other thing that I end up hearing from folks is, well, I got a check from Donald Trump during the pandemic. And I have to remind people, listen, you also got a check from Joe Biden when he came into office during the pandemic. During the financial crisis, we gave working families financial relief. The only difference is Joe Biden and I did not put our names on the check. And so, because our attitude was, this isn't us trying to get credit politically, this is making sure folks keep their heads above water. But when I hear, you go through neighborhoods and folks say, well, I remember getting that check from Donald Trump, I have to tell them, don't get hoodwinked by that. Don't get bamboozled by that. A Democratic and Republican Congress together gave you that relief in an emergency, and Donald Trump just put his name on it. And so that is not an example of somehow an economic policy that would be helpful. The main thing that economically right now people are still frustrated about is prices are still high. Inflation's gone down, but we had that big spike in inflation. And I try to remind people, first of all, just like no matter who was president, COVID was going to happen and people would have gotten sick. No matter who was president, there was going to be some inflation after COVID because global supply chains had gotten messed up. People had received cash, but they couldn't spend it because they couldn't go out. There was pent-up demand, and that drove up prices, and then they came down. When you ask Donald Trump now, what are you going to do about inflation, he's got no answer. So any of your listeners who are thinking about potentially voting for Donald Trump, either because you've got good memories of the Trump economy or because somehow you think he's got a plan to bring prices down, I've got to tell you, he's got no plan for bringing prices down, and he does not deserve credit for the economy that you remember, because that wasn't something that he actually helped produce.
Let me ask you two more quick questions. One, in terms of those of us, and I'm talking for listeners as well as people that work with our civil rights groups, that fear civil rights, voting rights, to establish and get some things done, we have to reach out and work with people that we may not necessarily agree with politically. I remember when you were president, you did concrete things like the policing group that you'd formed that you had gave us access to, that ended up really reforming policing, that, and on and on and on. You even had me touring with Newt Gingrich. I mean, what kind of expectations should we have that gives room for Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, to be able to say, I'll put a Republican on the cabinet, where she's not pigeonholed and therefore not effective to a lot of our concerns, and then we blame her that she wasn't black enough?
Well, look, here's what I've been telling folks, because I think there are a handful of other arguments that I'm hearing as I travel around the country. First of all, a lot of folks out there understandably get frustrated. They feel like, things don't change enough. I vote, and then I look around, and my neighborhood still has unemployment, and we still have violence. People are still being incarcerated. Young people still don't have opportunities. So what's the point of voting? And what I try to remind them is and you understand this, Reverend, because you've watched this over the decades. Politics does not solve all our problems. Change is slower than I would like. But this is a big, complicated country with a lot of different interest groups and constituencies. The question you have to ask is, can my vote for Kamala Harris make my life a little bit better? And potentially, if Donald Trump is president, does my life get a little bit worse? And what I try to describe is yes. The answer is yes. You take my presidency as an example. I did not solve health care, but Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, gave 50 million people who did not have health insurance before access to health insurance, affordable health insurance. That millions of people have benefited. Millions more have benefited because they had pre-existing conditions. They could now get insurance because the insurance companies couldn't discriminate against them. Now, that's saved lives. That's made millions of people's lives better. It did not solve all problems, but it solved some problems. The same goes with, let's say, something like mass incarceration. I've been describing how, when I put Eric Holder in as our Attorney General, we discussed the fact that the majority of incarcerations take place under state law, and the president doesn't have control over that. But the president does have control over the federal criminal justice system. It only accounts for maybe 10, 15% of people who receive sentences. But we changed policies so that U.S. attorneys were not always going for the max sentence, but we're going for fair and proportional sentences. And as a result, during my presidency, the federal prison population went down at the same time as the crime rate went down. Now, I didn't solve all of the issues of mass incarceration. That would have required, similar movement at the state level. But we made it better. And so there are thousands of people out there who benefited from that. That's how you have to think about your vote. Not that it's going to solve every problem, but does it make things better? And conversely, when Donald Trump was president, things got worse. And if you look at something like policing and civil rights issues, he's on record saying he wants to provide police immunity regardless of the merits of any case. And he's sending a signal that he does not think that the civil rights of potential victims of police misconduct are something he cares about. And that kind of message from the president matters. So, the upshot is that when Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States and Tim Walz is vice president of the United States, not everything's going to be fixed all at once, but we will be put on a trajectory that is better because we have somebody in office who is competent, who is capable, who is dedicated, and who sees ordinary working people as important and is going to be focused on their problems and not her problems, and is not going to try to break things just for the sake of breaking them or because it's good politics. I'll give you one last example because I've also heard this, Reverend, is people say, what about the immigrants? And I say, look, we've got a real problem down at the borders. And we are a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. And so we can't have people just coming over willy-nilly. That's dangerous for them. It's burdensome on communities. So we have to fix the problem. But Donald Trump's not interested in fixing the problem. He had 4 years to fix the problem. He didn't do, 3/4 of what he said he didn't do. What he did do most recently is there was a bipartisan bill that Kamala Harris was willing to work with Republicans to pass that would have made the situation at the border better, safer, more fair, more just. Donald Trump specifically called up Republicans in Congress and told them, don't vote for it, not because it wouldn't have made things better. He didn't want Republicans to vote for it because he thought it was going to take an issue away from him for the election. So on all these issues, the key thing I just ask for people to do is get the facts, look at them, and I think you will recognize that Kamala Harris is vastly better qualified. She's more likely to bring people together. She's not going to solve every problem, but Donald Trump and his presidency will make things worse in concrete ways in your community. And you cannot, just decide because, you've seen a TikTok or a tweet or an ad about making America great again, that's the basis by which you make a decision. Look at the facts. And hopefully with your listeners, I've got some credibility. And I was president for 8 years, and I could unequivocally say that the country was better off after I left than the way I found it. And so I know a little bit about what it takes, and Kamala Harris has what it takes.
Well, I'm going to leave it there. You answered my second question in this answer. I appreciate you taking time and always appreciate hearing what you have to say. President of the United States, Barack Obama, 44th president.
Reverend, you've been doing the Lord's work out there. Keep it up, man. I'm proud of you.
Right,
and again, happy birthday.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, brother. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.